Kratos or PlayStation icons, but Crash Bandicoot was the thing that made the PlayStation legit when it happened. They needed a mascot, and he was that guy. Even though he wasn't legally that guy, he was that guy. And then you start to tie in these other problems like gameplay modes and how it feels to play the game and how bare bones it kind of is. Perhaps having a few more of the real A-tier PlayStation All-Stars in your PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale game would have given them a little bit of time to patch the game with some updates, because that was a new thing back when PlayStation 3 happened. You could do that. It probably also would have made people super excited as opposed to irritated, because it was a new thing back then. Like, oh, this game could be made better. And number 6 is Dante's Inferno. The hell described by Dante sounds like a fascinating place to explore. There's a reason why this story has inspired so many artists throughout history, and the possibility of somebody putting out a true alternative to the God of War series is pretty exciting. But while Dante's Inferno isn't a terrible game, again, this is one of the pretty decent entries to this. It still feels like there's a lot of wasted potential. The premise itself is absolutely perfect for a video game. I mean, as described by Dante, hell is just about the perfect setting. It's got 9 circles, so hey, 9 levels. Or maybe 9 worlds with 3 levels of I don't know. You could apply that to video game conventions as easily as possible. In this case, we got 9 levels. Each one has its own unique theme associated with the worst vices of humanity. The punishments get more severe as you go down further and further into the depths of hell. Seems like there should be dozens of games already about this. But this is the only one I can remember that really seriously attempted it in the AAA space. And unfortunately, the results are kind of middling. Yeah, you can tell the developers were having a hell of a lot of fun. But with the second circle, Lust, which I don't know if you've played this game and you've seen that boss, but I don't know what people would think of that intro animation nowadays. Anyway, they enjoyed the third circle, Gluttony, as well. They're kind of just being as disgusting and shocking as they could, but they kind of ran out of ideas. And by the end, it kind of feels like you're just exploring some slightly demonic caves. It's kind of a real failure of imagination. Combat, Dante's Inferno, really solid, but the lack of set pieces and interesting new levels that separate themselves from the previous one in some way really hurts the game. The God of War games would hit you with big moments and exciting events that keep things interesting and really change stuff up so you feel like you're at least in different places. Dante's Inferno pretty stingy with that, and it gets kind of boring. In this case, it's not that the devs' plans for the final game were just so much bigger, it's that the concept alone is a great idea and the final product feels lacking compared to that. Again, not a bad game, just really didn't live up to what it could have been. At number 5 is Fable 3. All the Fable games feel like missed opportunities in a lot of ways. Despite being great, I really enjoy the Fable games, including Fable 3. That being said, the third game had an opportunity that was totally squandered. Halfway through the third game, your hero becomes king. Normally, this kind of thing happens at the end of the game and is like a reward. But the idea here is that now you're the king, you've deposed the previous tyrant, and it's up to you to decide if you'll do things differently or if you'll just be as bad as the last guy. Being king would add complexity to the moral choices of the game, which are normally a bit black and white. At least that was supposed to be the idea. Instead, it basically boils down to a money check. Do you have enough money to afford whatever somebody asks for? Then you're good. If you don't, though, it's bad. That's what it really boils down to. A few binary choices between obviously good and bad things that you may or may not have money for. Now, that does not mean that Fable 3 is not good, or any of the Fable games, because they all have similar issues, honestly. Actually, no. These are really fun games that I really enjoy. The problem is that they were promised to be about 1,000 times more than they are. I don't think if that had ever happened, we'd have been saying stuff like this. Like, this was a really ambitious idea that ended up kind of being just regular story fare that we've seen in a million RPGs. Just the situation's a little different.
You are looking well today, my lord. Your Majesty.
And number 4 is Dragon Age 2, another day, another BioWare game that wasted its potential. And in this game's case, at least most of the blame doesn't really fall on BioWare. EA is the real bad guy here, as is usually the case with stories that mention EA. But they gave the studio only 16 months to make the sequel to a game that took them nearly a decade. Dragon Age is it's a culmination of a large amount of work. There's no way this game could have ever lived up to it either. There are good ideas. The concept of an RPG where you're following the life of one character in a specific city that changes over a long period of time. It's a good idea. If it was properly explored, probably could have been interesting because your choices could have affected the overall makeup of the city. Your companions could change and evolve over the years. Like, think about this. Characters could become friends, then enemies, then make up. Some place could be destroyed thanks to a choice. Some magic could be used that shouldn't have been, or maybe could have been sealed away forever. Who knows? There's a lot of unique storytelling opportunities, but unfortunately it seemed to kind of be an excuse to just reuse as many assets as possible because they had to make a game in 16 months. It's hard to get too mad about the story. You could call it a lazy both sides are bad plot, but both sides usually are bad in some way. You have to develop that kind of a plot to be something nuanced and interesting for it to work. And rather than doing that, they kind of had to speedrun development, and they ended up with a lot of really annoying characters. The Dragon Age setting, super fascinating. There's like really cool stuff that happens in that world, but in this particular game, most of the interesting stuff happens off. So, what's the point? And number 3 is Left Alive, easily one of the worst games of 2019. Kind of baffling to think that Square Enix would release the game in the state that it released in. Like, do you remember this? Most conversations about this game revolve on how unplayable it was. And yes, it is terrible. It was not fun to play at all. But the thing that bugs me the most is how it probably could have been really good. Basically, a game that's like Metal Gear Solid 5, where you explore urban environments and scrounge for resources, taking on giant mechs. You know, that sounds awesome. It sounds so awesome.
This is what I was born to do.
Full status check. Legs are badly damaged and unable to function.
But it was a mess. A drab, ugly, badly controlling mess. The AI, mess. The art direction, mess. So much is just a mess. It's even set in the awesome Front Mission universe, which is just completely wasted. There's 3 characters. And given the right team, this could have been an incredible game. In fact, if And number 2 is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, one of the best fighting games of all time. Pretty amazing follow-up. In 2017, both Capcom and the Marvel brand riding pretty high. Seems like a no-brainer that the 4th game would be amazing. But it was not. It was not. The roster was weak. The graphics were, weirdly ugly. The whole gem system was an ugly holdover from Tekken vs. Street Fighter that nobody wanted. I had to take a second here to highlight how bad the roster was, though, you know. Compared to the massive cast of Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which had 50 characters, 25 Marvel, 25 Capcom, Infinite has only 36, and a lot of them at release were just obvious reskins of the characters from the previous game, which was, by the way, on last-gen consoles. Instead of a vital and interesting roster of popular characters mixed with some obscure ones that make you go, oh, who's that? It's just a hit parade of characters you know from Capcom, characters from recent Marvel movies. Like Disney really got their hooks into Capcom this time. Even though mutants like Wolverine are extremely popular, they were not in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite because Disney didn't have the rights to those characters. And it's not like Disney doesn't have the resources to get the rights. Disney is huge. Thing is, gameplay is still pretty good. It's slower and more deliberate compared to the pace of fights from 3. And teams are now just 2 rather than 3 fighters. and it could have worked if the context of the fighting was better. But if you know what Marvel vs. Capcom is, there's a lot more to it than just like, the fighting's good. At number 1 is Metal Gear Solid 5. What we did eventually get was good, but it could have been a lot more. It's hard not to play Metal Gear Solid 5 and feel like there's something missing. The opening is strange and exciting, but then you get to the rest of the game. Gameplay, absolutely fantastic, but the story completely flatlines and it struggles to recover. It feels like huge swaths of the story are just missing, and it doesn't help that Snake barely ever speaks, especially since they got Kiefer Sutherland, an A-list actor, to be Snake, and like people put out videos of every time he talks that take like 4 or 5 minutes. I don't remember exactly, but they're not long. You go from this type of voice to this type of voice. It would matter a lot more if he talked more, but man, he didn't. That's not how the game went. I mean, can you remember how mad people were about leaving David Hayter behind? And then like, they also kind of left Kiefer Sutherland behind a little too. But anyway, many clearly set up features of the story never materialize. You build the battle gear as part of the story and then never see it again. Eli steals the Metal Gear from Mother Base and it never gets followed up on. Cypher's role in the story is told entirely in audio logs. The list goes on. So much of what is implied in the trailers just never happens. People complain about the amount of cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid games, but this is the total opposite. At this point, the breakup between Konami and Kojima is pretty well documented. The game may have gotten too ambitious, it was taking too long and went way over budget, so they basically were like, yeah, you need to release the game. It wasn't like a buggy mess or anything, but it did feel like a lot of its potential was never utilized. The fact that the game is still as good as it is really a testament to the quality of the gameplay, because the stories, I mean, I hesitate to call it total mess because there's just not barely anything there compared to what's clearly meant to be there, and so many of the major features that could have pushed the game into legendary status are just MIA. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first, of course, is subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks. Sometimes franchises go on just a little too long.